Hello, everyone, and welcome to Malvern Books, hosting of Scott Semegran's new book launch. And this is for the Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island. So it's a great book. We're really excited about this. So I'm so glad everyone's here to join us. And congratulations, Scott, on the newest book. So first of all, we're also going to be hearing from Charlotte Gullick, who is the editor, one of the editors of the book, as well as a great writer in her own right. So we'll hear from her first, and then Scott will join in after. So just so everyone knows, if you have any questions for Scott or Charlotte, you're welcome to include those in the chat box, and after we finish, then they will address those as time permits. So, so first of all, Charlotte Gullick is the chair of the Creative Writing Department at Austin Community College, and she holds an MA in Creative Writing from UC Davis and an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Her first novel, By Way of Water, was chosen by Jane Ann Phillips as the grand prize winner of the Santa Fe Writers Project. Her writing has appeared in The Rumpus, Brevity, Kidhead Chapel, Hippocampus, and the LA Review. Charlotte? Great.
Thank you so much, Becky. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you everyone for being here. And particularly thank you to Scott. Congratulations on the publication, birth date of another book from you. It's really exciting. And I'm really delighted that you asked me to celebrate with you tonight. So really grateful. I'm a little nervous, so I have to get some of that out. I'm going to read, and I have some students here and a friend from each grad program that I went to are both here, so it's really lovely. And we talked a little bit about how it takes collaboration to accomplish things. And I'm just grateful for the many, many people who've helped me collaborate. And those two friends that are here tonight have also given me feedback on this book that I'm going to read from tonight. So I'm going to read two sections from my latest novel called One Man Reservation. And there's a little bit of setup you need to know. So Zane Larkin is my main character. She's a PhD student in American Studies at a Colorado university. She's close to being ready to begin writing her dissertation, but her father, Will Larkin, is terminally ill, and she's come back to Northern California to say goodbye. But she's ended up staying longer than she expected. Her father named her after the Western writer Zane Grey, and the Western genre is an aspect of what she is studying in her academic work. And while she has been gone, her father has become a marijuana farmer. So the novel is set in the year 2002. So weed is not legal anywhere in the US at this point, except for a few counties for medical use. You need to know that she has two siblings whose names are Angela and Cleve. And her mother's name was Tess. She has passed. And as his body is moving towards renal failure, which means his hands jerk a lot. So you'll hear descriptions of that. And that's why those are in there. And you also need to know that he's estranged from his own mother. So in this first scene that I'm going to read tonight, we're in a memory with my main character, Zane. In the present storyline, her father is watching the movie Little Big Man, which is also a novel, and she's been studying that in her academic work. So the film was a pivotal one in Zane's childhood, and it also factors into her studies. So you need to know that the main character of Little Big Man is a character named Jack Crabbe. And I should let people know that this is a scene that describes a lot of violence that's in the film. So here we go. When she was 8, her father had come home one evening with a rented VCR case in hand, 3 VH tapes in their hard plastic cases tucked under his arm. The Return of the Pink Panther, The Gods Must Be Crazy, Little Big Man. Her father had walked past the picture of Sitting Bull and into the kitchen where he kissed Zane's pregnant mother. While he hooked up the VCR, he talked. This is going to be a good story because finally, a white man gets his, he had said, his head behind the TV. He crawled backward and said, enough people have tried to kick my ass for looking like this. He pointed to his face and gestured to the picture of Sitting Bull, but we're fighters, aren't we? Her mother set out the TV trays. Angela and Zane helped, setting out folded paper towels, cups of water. And then Tessa served dinner, venison from a buck she shot, and field dress last fall, mashed potatoes and green beans from the garden. The movie started, and Jack Crabb talked about Custer and his experiences with him and Indians. Will ate, but he slowed down. Zane followed suit. When Crabb said he was 111 years old, her father threw his head back and gave his great hoarse laugh. They all joined him, letting the chuckle slide into their bellies. But within the next minute, when the movie showed Crabb's family slaughtered, Will returned to eating. He was used to this. He must have watched over 300 Westerns where the Indians were the villains. Will had chewed his steak, this man who looked more like Sitting Bull than John Wayne or Jimmy Stewart or Ronald Reagan. Zane had watched the movie, and she had watched Will. She laughed when he laughed, frowned when he did, taking in the two narratives of film and father. It was the scene that led up to the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the slaughter of Native women and children along the Bighorn and Yellowstone rivers, a violent chaos on the screen. Horses and bayonets and babies and blood and running women. Will had thrown his fork on his plate. The Westerns didn't show this. They didn't show people that looked like him run down and gutted, not after showing their humanity. He'd stood and they all waited. Would he become violent himself? The brutal history of the United States seemed to roil within him. Zane imagined his inner alignment with his cowboy image, wrestling with society's assessment of him as Indian. His jaw tightened and his hands were curled into fists. He walked out the door and the night swallowed him. They sat in the hushed house waiting. Zane didn't know whether to vomit or to cry. They didn't hear his truck, a good sign. He wasn't leaving in an angry rush, tires spitting rocks as he peeled out. Maybe he was pacing, curling and uncurling his fists. Finally, he returned and sat back down. I'm done eating. And her mother moved to grab his plate. It's all right, Tessa. And Zane understood he had a hold of himself, that he wasn't at the dangerous edge. There was reassurance in his voice rather than poison. Zane had heard him gentle her mother this way before trying to coax her onto a horse or to drive over a washout. He was saying, I got you, not I'm going to get you. So in the second scene, it's a little bit later in the book, and Zane has she can't find her dad. He's not in his cabin. So he's increasingly weak. She doesn't know where he is. And so she goes to look for him along a horse trail. And he's out there with his trusty horse Poncho. And just so you know, the dad names people and animals with very specific names. So she's Zane and the two horses are Poncho and Via. And he's out checking his marijuana plants. And I should tell you that there's an implication of violence in this scene too. When they returned to the horse, her father nuzzled its nose. He looked at Zane and shook his head. She watched the rise and fall of Will's chest. Poncho flicked his tail, stepped farther off the trail in search of the lush grass. I can't get on the horse. He untied the reins and held them out to her. One of his hands jerked and the horse stomped. Not to feel sorry for myself, but this was my last ride. She tightened her grip on the reins and memory took over. She stuck her foot into the stirrup and swung into the saddle. Poncho stamped another hoof and she settled in, her legs hugging the horse's side with forgotten expertise. The added height offered a perspective she'd missed. On the back of such an animal, one felt taller, more competent, more able to take on life. He handed her the rifle and she laid it across her lap. She tried to find words, something to preserve his dignity, but also show she cared that this was his last ride, that all the time she'd been gone hadn't made her a stranger to what he held dear, especially horses. Will kept a hand on Poncho's neck as they walked towards the cabin. Maybe this could be the comfort rather than some mistake coming out of her mouth. She remembered how in the book, Little Big Man, the writer made a point to explain how Cheyenne warriors talked to their ponies, how there should be no secrets between a man and his horse. Underneath her, the animal moved in elegant rhythm, and she wondered what mysteries her father might have shared with Pancho. Or was she doing what she had known Will to do, to conflate native cultures, to pull from whatever suited him at the moment? At the corral, she leaned the rifle against an end post. Inside the pen, Zane removed the blanket, saddle, and reins and ran a hand over the horse's hindquarters. When she was 10, she'd read every one of the Black Stallion books. In those novels, the horses were treated so well, curry-combed and brushed, manes braided. She once asked her father why he didn't do those things. Hell, girl, that's what rich people do because they have the time. These are working animals. This might have been her first clue about the divide between what she read and what they lived. She slipped between the rails to hang the tack on the small lean-to he'd made into a barn. There were a few bales of hay, a metal garbage can of grain, 3 saddles hanging on large nails. She arranged the things she brought from the corral and returned to the horses. He leaned on the fence and watched. Zane. It seemed like he was saying her name for the first time, tasting it, trying it on for size. I never did have time to read any of those books, by Zane Grey. She scratched Pancho behind the ears. You want to talk about books? I was thinking, it happens as death tries to stare you down. You think how things have gone. He paused. Some days I miss her so much. Your mother made me better. She knew I had more than anger to give. Dad, do you ever think about your own mother? After the words were out, she held her breath. Mama never wanted to go back to the country. She liked the city. She liked running water and electricity. That shack in Arkansas, it must have been depressing as hell. There's one picture from them days. My mother, she looks so Indian, it hurts. Interesting choice of words. Women, they got a way of seeing that I don't get, let alone respect. He turned to her. Did you just hear what I said about your mother? I respected her. Why are you calling this a one-man reservation then? That seems a little limited in vision. Aren't we a lot of things, Irish and Welsh from your dad's side? The world made me choose Zane, so I chose Cherokee. The books I've been studying, they say there's a lot more to being native than looking a certain way. Person can't read about being Indian. It's a lived experience, and I've lived it. He looked away from her. And what if all those people who claim they were Indian actually took up for the land, for each other? Even if they're just making it up because it suits them, it'd be a revolution. She said, I think 1/3 of the United States says they have a Cherokee grandmother. Zane hadn't known this before she'd gone to college, before that first class with Hale, when a Yakima student had made a comment about white people claiming native ancestry. Well, we do. Her father's voice was hard. She knew she was challenging him, that she should back off, but one more question built inside her. It's like you think being native means being more violent. Pancho flicked his tail with a deft ripple of muscles. Zane stepped away from the horse, closer to her father. He stared at her now. You got to promise me something. And he looked so tired, the skin under his eyes, puffy, dark bags. I don't want to get delirious. I don't want to become cruel. What secrets did he want to make sure didn't spill out of him at the end? There had to be more than pigs and high-interest loans and marijuana gardens. And I don't want to suffer. Pancho almost stomped on her foot. She barely moved away in time. Maybe her father was delirious right now. How would she know the difference? You understand what I'm saying? His left arm jerked up, another flightless movement of crazed birds. Remember, I didn't learn shit in college, Dad? You have to spell it out. She slipped between the corrals to join him. They now stood side by side, 2 old ranch hands considering the day. I don't want to die in a hospital. He ran a hand over his face. You got to help me do it at home. Like how? She stuck one of her Converse onto the lower corral rail. With enough morphine. He pushed away from the fence and started hobbling down the hill to his cabin. She grabbed the rifle and followed him. In the domain of men and dead boars and bear traps, she wasn't sure where to turn. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. That was great. Thank you so much. And is that a forthcoming book then, Charlotte, or is that one out?
Let's hope it's forthcoming, Becky.
I'm sure it's forthcoming. It's great.
Thank
I
you.
just wasn't sure if it was already out that I had missed it.
No. Thank you for asking.
All right. So next, here's the man of the hour. Scott Semegran is an award-winning writer of 8 books. BlueInk Review described him as a gifted writer with a wry sense of humor. His previous novel, To Squeeze a Prairie Dog, was a 2019 Reader's Favorite International Book Award winner, silver medal for fiction, humor/comedy, the 2019 Texas Author Project winner for adult fiction, and the 2020 IBPA Benjamin Franklin Award gold medal winner for humor. His book, Sammie and Budgie, was the first place winner for fiction in the 2018 Texas Authors Book Awards. His book, Boys, was a 2018 IndieReader Discovery Awards winner for short story. He lives in Austin, Texas, with his wife, 4 kids, 2 cats, and a dog. And tonight, of course, we'll be hearing from his new book, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island. So, Scott, if you will please grace us with your reading.
Thank you very much, Becky. Thanks everyone for being here. This is fantastic. I'm really glad that this book is out now for everyone to read. I'm glad Charlotte is here with me. She was the editor on my book as well, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit towards the end. I definitely want to thank Charlotte as well as my wife and Brandon Wood for helping with editing, and Andrew Leeper for doing the cover. The cover of this book is fantastic. And Tim Seiler, who is also here online with us, he's the narrator for the audiobook, which is also fantastic. So I'd like to thank my crew for bringing this book to life. And I'd also like to thank Malvern Books. They are a fantastic bookstore in Austin. You can order my book from them. The phone number is in the chat. They have curbside service. They'll ship the book to you. Just give them a buzz and they'll get my book right to you, and Charlotte's as well. I want to start off by saying that the inspiration for this book was I was listening to an audio recording of Lord of the Flies. Like many of you, I go back and listen or read classics every once in a while, particularly ones I liked as a kid, and I like to reevaluate them as an adult. And I was listening to this particular audiobook that was narrated by William Golding, who's the author of Lord of the Flies. It was recorded in 1977. And it was one of the few audiobooks I listened to that had a really long, rambling intro where he talks about the inspiration for Lord of the Flies. And so in his crotchety British voice, he starts saying, well, I was talking to my wife by the fire, and I had this idea of some boys being stuck on an island, and I imagine this is scaled down society. And I went, hold on. British boys that were at a private school, white boys, that's not scaled down society. So I had an epiphany. I was thinking, well, what would it have been like with the boys I knew that were 12 or 13? What if they got stuck somewhere and were stranded? How would they treat each other? And my initial thought was they wouldn't do what the boys in Lord of the Flies did to each other. And so I had an inspiration for writing this particular book. I also learned that Lord of the Flies was a response to another book called The Coral Island, which was written in the 1850s. It's a Robinson Crusoe style story. And I thought, well, why don't I write a response to a book? I've never done that before. And so that's where my book, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island, comes from. It takes place in 1986 in Central Texas. It's about 4 middle school boys who are bullied by some high school kids. They find the backpack of the leader of this gang of bullies. The backpack is filled with money and marijuana. They keep it for themselves. The bullies keep hounding them, and they decide to run off to a lake house out near Canyon Lake. And then they get stranded on an island out there. And so this is my story, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island. I have a few selections I'd like to read for you. Sorry, I have to take off my glasses. The first bit is just the intro to the book. This is how the book starts. The first time I experienced real life-threatening danger was in the 7th grade. I may have been in real danger before the 7th grade, but if I was, then I don't remember it. That's the funny thing about memories. Some memories are these delicate, wispy things like dandelion seeds caught in a breeze, maybe sprouting someday, maybe they simply vanish. Other memories are these technicolor, vibrant things filled with music and smells and emotions, powerful and evocative mental cinema. Looking back, a lot of my memories of my friends in the 7th grade are living, vibrant things. I didn't need danger to make these memories of my friends stick in my brain. But there was once this remarkable time with them that you won't believe. When I finally tell you the whole story, you'll most likely say, nah, that didn't happen. But it did. It really did. Before I tell you about the time me and my friends got ourselves into some real danger when we were in middle school, first let me explain about myself and where I grew up. My name is William Flynn. I'm from a little suburban town outside of San Antonio, Texas called Converse. This town's sensibility was more strip mall than metropolis, but it did have the basic necessities for middle school kids. A dollar cinema with cheap flicks and all-you-can-eat popcorn, an arcade with our faves Donkey Kong and Joust, a bookstore, Marvel titles more than DC, a skating rink, plenty of convenience stores, and the like. What more could a kid want? Back then, my parents called me Billy, a nickname that referred to my uncle who died during the Vietnam War, but I preferred my real name, William, even more so since Bloody Billy came into my life, but more on that later. My birth parents divorced when I was a baby, so I grew up mostly with my mom, Pam, and her new husband, Steve. He was a nice enough guy, although mostly quiet when it came to me. He loved my mom very much. That was obvious by the way he kissed and hugged her. I don't think he cared for me too much, since he rarely acknowledged my presence back then, even with a pat on the shoulder. Anyway, the middle school in Converse, Texas that I attended was called Franklin D. Roosevelt Middle School, a better president I couldn't think of for a school moniker. Funny thing was, it was rare to have a school in the South named after a northerner like Roosevelt, especially a liberal do-gooder like FDR. Most of the schools in and around San Antonio were named after Confederate war heroes, like Robert E. Lee or Jefferson Davis. Don't ask me why. It's just an observation. But fortunately for me and my friends, we went to Franklin D. Roosevelt Middle School. Now don't get me wrong, the name was great, but the outside looked more like a state penitentiary than an institution of learning. Most of the kids had a parent who worked at the nearby Air Force Base, Randolph, and because FDR had students whose families were from all over the United States, the kids were all the possible shades of human beings, from pale white to middling brown to dark black. In the mid-1980s, it must have been a rare thing having a school population like that in Texas. Looking back, I can't imagine my childhood any other way. It's where I made my best friends, my posse, mis compadres. Their names were Randy Moss, Brian Johnson, and Miguel Gonzalez. We were thick as thieves, as they say, or 4 peas in a pod, or whatever you want to call a tight crew of close friends. We did everything together, and when we weren't together, we made plans to meet up. We usually met after school in the wooded area behind FDR, a path cutting through the oak, pecan, and cedar trees that led the students home to the surrounding neighborhoods, like Thousand Oaks or Hidden Oaks. As you rode your bike down the path, a small clearing appeared in the deep wooded area, and there was always some extra sporting equipment and metal bleachers lying around, left there by school district workers after football or baseball games. And on this day, the day that would be remembered as the day real danger seeped into our lives, it was hot as blazes as Randy and I rode our BMX bicycles to the clearing to meet Brian and Miguel. It was the second to last week of school, and even though it was technically still spring, it felt like summer had already arrived. The end of school always exuded the promise of fun. Summer couldn't come fast enough. So that's the opening to the book. Later on, like I had mentioned, when William and Randy and Miguel and Brian find the backpack filled with marijuana and money, they're hounded by the Thousand Oaks gang, but they continue to evade them for a while and they get a little cocky. So this is a little later on in the book. The last week of school was supposed to be a joyous time for all the students and teachers at Franklin D. Roosevelt Middle School. While the teachers were daydreaming of cruise ship vacations in the Caribbean or road trips to Port Aransas for weekend beach vacations, the students were chattering about their own summer plans. Many bragged about going to a water park in New Braunfels called Schlitterbahn, a silly sounding name which means slippery road in German, a nod to the German heritage of the region of Texas, to ride the infamous water slides or even tubing down the frigid waters of nearby Guadalupe River. Others confessed to their desire to visit Astroworld in Houston so they could ride the mind-bending Grease Lightning, a coaster that flew forward then backward through a single vertical loop, or take the equally long trip to Six Flags over Texas and Dallas for a gut-twisting ride on the Texas Shootout, a 225-foot tall parachute drop ride. Both rides were guaranteed, it was rumored, to make a kid hurl chunks, which was the perfect dare for any of the students at FDR, most of which wanted to come back to school in the fall with bragging rights of barf-free coast rides or free fall drops. The only kids not enjoying this final week of school were Randy, Miguel, Brian, and I. We spent that last week like idiots, running for our lives or riding our bikes, or more precisely, rather than making summer plans. How could we have been so stupid as to agree to keep Bloody Billy's backpack hidden in my closet? Every day after school during that last week, we took the Thousand Oaks gang on a variety of wild goose chases through the wooded areas surrounding the Thousand Oaks and Hidden Oaks neighborhoods, or rode our bikes down the cement ditches, coursing through our neighborhoods like a concrete circulatory system to escape their souped-up sports cars. We even hid in a local fire station, pretending our impromptu visit was a trip down memory lane when our third grade elementary class visited for a field trip, by convincing the station captain that we were really wanted to examine the top of the fire engines for educational purposes. But when Thursday came around, Bloody Billy and the Thousand Oaks gang had our number. We had grown cocky as the week closed and decided that we could evade them anywhere and any time, even stopping at a 7-Eleven after school for Slurpees, Cheetos, and candy. The 7-Eleven was a popular hangout for the middle schoolers, and the Thousand Oaks gang patiently waited outside by the bike rack, which was parked around the side of the building and out of sight from the front windows. So when we came outside, already drunk with a sugar buzz from 24-ounce Slurpees and mouths full of gummy bears, they ambushed us, dragging us around the back of the building. Without mincing words, they beat the crap out of us. I literally only remember pushing the glass door open for Randy, Miguel, and Brian, then someone grabbing my arm and dragging me behind the building. By the time I figured out who was dragging me, and not knowing what happened to my friends, although I could hear them screaming, I witnessed a firework display that was unparalleled in my experience before or since. When the fireworks dissipated and the ringing in my ears stopped, I remembered looking up at Bloody Billy from the hot asphalt. He looked pissed, really pissed. He cracked his knuckles, which were covered in blood. I assumed it was my blood. I know you have it. You better tell me where it is before you get a beating that is worse than any nightmare. Now, the saying, he was beaten senseless, is a cliche, but there is quite a bit of truth in it, because even though Billy was talking to me, he might as well have been speaking to a rock. I could hear his words, but my brain couldn't parse any of the thoughts into a cogent answer. In fact, all I could think about was where my Slurpee had gone. I was enjoying it immensely when he snatched me, and I still had the taste of it in my mouth. And that the asphalt underneath me was very hot, searing the skin of my forearm and my lower back. I should have just told him that the backpack was hidden behind a plumbing vent in my closet, and that he could drive me home, and I would simply get it for him. But I didn't do that. I just babbled senselessly. I'm going to count to 3, he growled, grabbing my t-shirt at the neck hole, then pulled me closer. His breath smelled of Big Macs and cigarettes. And if you don't tell me where it is, then it's lights out. So that's the second section. I got one more I'm going to read. So later on, once the middle school boys go hide out in the lake house and they get trapped out on the island, they realize that there are no parents around to help them. There are wild animals. There's owls. There's all types of things that have surrounded them out there. William has a moment of reflection by himself, and this is what he says. Randy closed his eyes and soon snored softly. He must have been more tired than he thought. Me, I wasn't tired at all. And I couldn't lay still long because the rough ground with its pebbles, sticker burrs, and dried twigs stabbed my ribs and spine through my t-shirt. Every few minutes, I would have to fidget and find a new position for my body to lay before repeating the process again in hopes for at least a little comfort. It was useless, though, and nothing made it more apparent that I wasn't home than lying on the hard, rough ground without a roof over my head or a blanket to keep me warm. This was the first time in my conscious memory that I ruminated about my life and the real danger I found myself in. Before the boat wreck on Sometimes Island, I don't think I contemplated my existence and the possibility that my life could end. It was a sobering experience for a middle schooler. I thought about my parents and wondered how much my mom missed me. Surely at that point, she knew me and my friends were missing. How much pain am I causing her? I thought. Would she be mad at me for running away? I even missed my stepdad, Steve, and would have preferred his solemn presence to the predicament I was in on that unforgiving island, with the wind laughing at us and the owl dropping dead mice. I thought about my friends' parents and wondered how they felt too. Then mental images of all the things I would miss if I perished on that island marched through my mind, a strange parade of unfortunate missed opportunities, like my first kiss, which hadn't happened yet since I hadn't met a girl I wanted to kiss by that point, or getting my driver's license and a first car at 16 years of age, which I later learned would be a 1978 Honda Civic with a 60 horsepower engine, the perfect car for me, or going to the senior prom with Carly Simpson, who would then go down in history as the first girl I kissed and the first one to break my heart in two. She crushed me after the prom. But if I were to die on Sometimes Island, then none of these things would come to be. I would rot on the island, my bones collecting dust and housing spiders, along with the skeletons of Randy, Brian, and Miguel. My eyes watered, my heart ached. Knowing that coming out to the lake was my idea, I felt an oppressive amount of guilt, even if the Thousand Oaks gang had something to do with it. I even felt bad for Bloody Billy, if you can believe that. I was sure his mom missed him too. But on second thought, decided that even his own mother probably didn't like him. He was too much of a degenerate to be loved. My immature mind put the blame for our predicament squarely on Billy, the one who put us on that path to escape the cabin of seclusion and our eventual wreck on Sometimes Island. It's all that jerk's fault, I whispered to myself. Yup, his fault. I imagined Bloody Billy at the bottom of the lake, his face and neck bloated, bottom feeders sucking on his blanched arms, his shirt billowing in the water like while moonbeams danced around him, and his backpack lying in the silty lake bed not too far from him, just out of reach, a school of minnows pecking at it. I had no idea how deep the lake was at that point, where he vanished, or if the moonbeams could reach the bottom of the lake, or even if there were bottom feeders down there, but just the idea of this soothed me. I joyfully thought about Billy's watery grave while looking up at the stars. That son of a biscuit, I whispered to myself. Then immediately thought of my mother making breakfast back at home, popping open a can of Pillsbury biscuits and laying the circles of dimpled dough on a baking sheet. Biscuits. I soon fell asleep, a deep, deep black hole of sleep without dreams of scrumptious breakfasts or sunken bullies. That's from The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island, my new book, which
Love
you
it.
can get at Malvern Books.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. That was great. I love your selections. That was really wonderful to kind of take us through the different parts of the story. So we're kind
Thank you.
definitely engaged, but not giving everything away. So really great reading. Good choices. So now, if there are any questions, we'd be happy, Scott and Charlotte would be happy to take those. If anyone wants to type anything into the chat, we're happy to do that. In addition, I think that Scott is they're going to be having a raffle. Is that right, Scott?
Oh, yes, yeah. I like to mention that there's going to be a raffle. So you want to do it now? Maybe we should do it now. So I'm going to ship a hardcover of this new book to one lucky winner. My lovely assistant, my wife, Lori, has been getting everybody's names. So let's do this real quick. Let's see who we got here. Who's the winner? Dun, dun, dun. Ashley. Ashley, I'm going to need your address. If you can send it to me privately in the chat, and I'll mail you a copy of the hardcover of my new book.
Thank you.
You are
Lucky
welcome.
you, Ashley. That's
I hope
great.
you enjoy it.
And thank you, Charlotte, for telling me to show up. This is like
Yay.
my day.
But I'm so glad that Charlotte's here. Charlotte was the editor of my book, and I enjoyed working with her very much. As some of you know, she works at Austin Community College in the creative writing department. She is also a fantastic writer herself. And I met Charlotte. I did an interview with her. I'd read her book and loved it so much, and asked her to edit this book. I really wanted to up my game with this particular book. So I tried to get the best editor that I could. So
It was
Charlotte,
really
is there
fun,
anything-
really fun to edit it and work with you on it and challenge you and, like how such a great story and such great characters, and your love of them is one of my favorite things about the book. Like one time I had a student say to me, I can feel my withering gaze come out of my pen as I write my characters. And like yours is such the exact opposite, that love of characters. That, I mean, in addition to reading those things, but those other
Right.
books that do you feel like you were like writing from a place of affection?
I did, because these boys, although it's not an autobiographical book, they're very much like the friends I had when I was in middle school. And so I had friends that were Latino, they were Black, they were Asian. We lived near an Air Force base, and so all the families came from all over. And so that was one of the things that struck me about Lord of the Flies and Golding's comment about scaled down societies. I thought, well, that's not how I know boys this age. And I also knew that boys that age were very kind to each other. My friends were all very empathetic and nice. And, I tried to imagine what it would be like with boys that were similar to the ones that I knew, what they would do. And this is literally how I thought that this whole scenario would go. And one of the things that I appreciated with working with you was that since they were a diverse crew, I wanted to make sure that it was authentic interaction between them, that they were portrayed in an authentic way. I know that in this day and age, people are very sensitive now to stories about, different cultures, different races. And I wanted to be sensitive to that too, as well. And you helped me with that a lot. You made me realize some things in the early draft that I had to go back and kind of look at and reevaluate. And it made the story a stronger story, I think. But I do have a love for these characters. There were points when I was writing the manuscript when I was sobbing, So, yeah, I love these characters a lot.
That's great. So you kind of answered it, but someone asked how much of the book is from your childhood?
Well, so when I was in middle school, I didn't live, I moved away from Texas for a short while. And so when I was in middle school, I lived in Alabama. My dad was in the military. So a lot of the interaction with the boys is very much inspired by my childhood. But they're all completely fictional. But I put that love that I had for those friends into these characters. And so I imagine what it would be like if my friends were stranded out there, how their parents would feel, if they got hurt or were possibly in a situation where they could die. It really affected me. And so, and when I was listening to the audiobook version that my friend Tim Seiler narrated, in fact, when it came to the end, I was sobbing again because it brought up all of the emotions I had when I was writing the book. I'm just very connected to this crew of kids.
Are you comfortable showing the page that's right before part 1? Because that's in our house, we can tell whether it's a good book or not. If it has one of those.
So my book has a map. I illustrated this map. I'm also a published cartoonist. And so this map is actually a real depiction of a bay in Canyon Lake, although there is not an island there. It's a fictional island. There is actually a Sometimes Island. It's on Lake Travis outside of Austin. But this particular lake, Canyon Lake, which is a real lake, it's outside of New Braunfels, and there's not an island in that particular place. But I am familiar with this bay. I'd been there when I was a kid. So yeah, I remember when you made that comment that there was a map and that's how you knew it was a good book. I was like, yes, I've already impressed you.
How much research did you have to do for this book, particularly on setting?
There was some research because although I do live in Texas, I wanted to make sure some of the things that I'd mentioned, like the types of trees, things that were going on in the environment, the types of animals that could be around, at least the majority of them could be around in this time frame of 1986. There are some, some fictional things in there to add drama, because maybe a wolf pack might not have been around at that particular time, but it makes for a scary story if there's a wolf that's outside of the cabin. So, but a lot of the stuff that the kids did, the music that they mentioned, the snacks that they were eating, the video games they were playing, I didn't have to do research because I was doing those things. So I was eating those snacks and I was watching those movies and I was playing the games. And they're in the tent playing games of Uno. Those were things that I was doing when I was bored on trips or, on camping trips. So,
are you saying that eating snacks is part of research of writing a novel?
It was, yes. And I've tried the snacks that I ate as a kid and they're disgusting. I don't recommend eating Charleston Chews or Little Debbie cakes, but that's the stuff I ate when I was a kid. Oh yes, I did some particular research on the diet sodas of the time because I had forgotten some of them. And I had mentioned them because Miguel finds an unopened diet soda in the water and the four boys share it. And it is a Pepsi Light, which was a diet soda in the 80s. I don't think it exists anymore. It was Diet Pepsi that had lemon juice in it. So
another question, is it okay that I'm reading from the chat box to you?
Yeah, sure.
So did you visit the Thousand Oaks area of San Antonio when you were writing a book? Did you visit a lake house?
So every big town I've been in Texas has a Thousand Oaks neighborhood. There's one in San Antonio, there's one outside of Austin, there's one in Houston. It's just kind of like one of those names that is, it's just a name for a Texas neighborhood. So there is one in San Antonio. It's actually in San Antonio. It's not really a suburban neighborhood. It's in San Antonio. But the one in the book is a fictional Thousand Oaks.
How about a lake
house?
And also,
I have not been to an abandoned lake house, but I have been to quite a few cabins and lake houses, so I could use my imagination.
Do you have any favorite lines? We all have our favorite lines. Someone.
Wow, there's really so many. It's more like favorite passages. There's some that make me very emotional. Like particularly the opening paragraph. You and I had some discussions about if that paragraph should be there or not. But I was deeply tied to that opening paragraph, so I had to leave it. And there's also a passage at the very end when William is a grown man and he's reflecting on his friend and the time then, and I'm very close to that passage in the book. Oh, also there is one, the passage about friends. The best friends you'll ever have are the ones you have right now, and I remember that was one I had talked to you about. Mm-hmm. Because the narrator Williams, says, well, people ask him if his friends in middle school were the best ones he ever had, and that refers to a line in Stephen King's The Body that Stephen King mentions that his best friends back then were the best ones he ever had. And when I was thinking about it, I always thought, whoever you have friends right now, maybe they'll hopefully be your friends in the future, but the ones you have right now are your best friends because they're supporting you at this particular moment. And what's better than that, right?
I love that so much.
So that would probably be my favorite line in the book.
Was it fun rediscovering the culture of the 80s?
Yes, I have this, I have this part in my brain for trivia. I have so much trivia from the 80s, like I can name bands, music, movies, actors, video games. It was a formative time for me. So it definitely was fun having these kids talk about those type of things, because I still love those things. In fact, I go to pinballs with my kid and we play Joust and Donkey Kong, and I just love that stuff. You know, we watch those movies from that time. So William mentioning like Close Encounters of the Third Kind or E.T. or Star Wars, that was all stuff I liked when I was a kid. And comic books, I loved comic books as a kid. So it was fun having the characters talk about those things.
There's one for both of us. With characters of color in your book, how do you feel about portraying people of color in your books? And would you say that what would you say is the importance of representation to both of us? So,
You want to start that one?
sure, I feel like it's extremely important, but it's also extremely tricky. And
Yeah.
you know, with the tradition of a certain group of people's voices being amplified and other people's voices not being listened to. But I think representation is really, really important. And also just really remembering, like, let's say that there's, you know, Tommy Orange wrote There. Just remember that there are a ton of writers who are amazing and who are Native American, that there isn't just one. I think that, you know, so representation is really important to me, but also that one character shouldn't represent a whole group of people. And so we need to read wide and we need to read deep. So that's my answer. How about you, Scott?
I definitely agree with that. Well, that's going back to what I was saying about Lord of the Flies and the comment of this was scaled down society. And I thought, well, no, it's not. That's not, you know, white kids from a private school in England, that's not scaled down society. And also those kids they had, you know, self-esteem issues. So you can tell on the first page that it's going to go bad right away. But for me, it was very important to have representation, to show what it was like, the kids that I knew in the 80s. And I knew kids from all different backgrounds. And the important part for me was to not portray these kids in a stereotypical way either, although they're all suburban. And so since they're suburban, they don't have the cliche way of talking that a lot of people might assume of a Black kid from the city or a Latino kid from the border. Just like in the show Stranger Things, all those kids, they sound the same. You couldn't, if you closed your eyes, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And so it was important to me, though, to make sure that these kids sounded authentic, because they were the type of kids that I hung out with. But I didn't want to get into any cliches at all as much as possible. I wanted them to be three-dimensional. So it was very important. One of the other things that was very important is Brian's family, the Black kid in the story, they're the affluent ones. And the two white kids are not the affluent kids in the story. They're from the poorer part of the neighborhood. And I felt that was very important too, because that was also the way I remembered some of the neighborhoods. They weren't necessarily, they were these white fancy neighborhoods outside of San Antonio. It was very diverse. And some of the families I knew, they were not, the real affluent ones were not white families. They were Hispanic families. They were the Black families. So that was important to me as well.
And I think it's also interesting that, like, when people are writing characters outside of their experience, that we need other people to help us get it right, to get the characters complex. And I think we had some conversations about that. And
we did. Yeah. But that was my experience. My experience was hanging around with a group of kids like that, even though I'm not African-American or Latino, my friends were like that. And so, I wanted them to ring true in writing this particular story. But it was funny because the books that I was responding to, The Coral Island, all white kids, Lord of the Flies, all white kids, and also The Body, which is the inspiration for the movie Stand By Me, also all white kids. So those three books, all white. And so I felt that it was important for me to shine a light on that a little bit and say that that's not a lot of people's reality in the United States, particularly.
so the question, are you still in contact with any of your boyhood friends that were the inspiration for these characters? I
am in contact with one. Actually, no, I take that back. Now two, because one found me and sent me an email recently. So when I was in junior high, I lived in Montgomery, Alabama. My dad was stationed there in the Air Force, and I had a friend named Jason. he and I still talk. He lives in Nashville. In fact, I saw him, I saw him back in February because I was at a conference, the ALA PLA conference, the Public Librarians Association. I was a featured author there, and he came and picked me up and we went and had dinner, and I hadn't seen him in a very long time. And then I was contacted by another friend from Montgomery who, his background, he's Indian. And he reached out to an email. He saw that I was at the Texas Book Festival a couple of years ago, and then remembered to send me an email. So.
And then we have, as artists and authors, your books are your babies. When it came to the cover of your books, did you feel like you had a lot of say in what it looked like, or did you let the artist kind of do what they want? Would you say that there was a balance? Also, Ryan says, hi, Dad.
Well, let's start with you, Charlotte, because you have a beautiful book cover. Did you have any say in, and did you have, is that a second cover?
It is a second cover.
Originally, I think I saw a cover that had a deer on it.
Well, no, what's funny about that is because when it was originally published, it was out of a New York publisher, and it had a beautiful elk bugling, and the mist was coming out. And
Right.
then I said, that's great, but there are no elk in my book. And the person in New York was like, no, that's a deer. And I was like, no, that's an elk. They didn't understand the difference. So when it got republished, one of the things that needed to happen is it needed a new cover. And I'd gone out to dinner at San Paulo, like the night before, and there's a beautiful piece of art. I loved it. And then the next morning I got an email, would you like it republished? If so, it needs a new cover. And so I went back to San Paulo, found that artist. She lives in Austin. She's from Spain.
Oh, nice.
And I just said, I really don't have the money to pay you, but would you consider letting me use this image because it's perfect? And I just imagine her being like, come to my studio tomorrow at 11. We will see if we are of like minds. And I was a little scared. And
so intimidating.
She was great. She does Inez Betillo. So she read the book, and then she said, yeah, you can use my image. So on this, I guess, so the short version of that is on the second print. I got to have some choice.
Excellent. So my cover was done by my friend Andrew Leeper, who's a graphic designer. He's also a musician. And the concept of it is all my idea. I went to Andrew and said, okay, I want to have like an island, and I want to have some owl eyes, and I want, a certain type of lettering. I told him, and he goes, I got it. And he did the rest. He and I, he's done a few of my books. He did the cover for Boys, and he did the cover for To Squeeze a Prairie Dog. And he and I have similar sensibilities. And so he got it right away. This was actually, with the exception of some of the coloring of the lettering, this was exactly what he presented to me the first time. And I was like, that's it. He nailed it. And I love this cover. People, I've gotten very nice comments about the cover. It's really beautiful. And I think it's very important that a cover is nice looking. It's a beautiful cover, because people really do judge a book by its cover, which is the weirdest thing to say, but they do. And that's where a lot of self-published books kind of get thrown to the side, because they don't spend the time or spend the money to hire somebody that really knows what they're doing, unfortunately, even though the book could be the best book in the world. But if it looks like, they got clip art from Word and made a cover, people will dismiss it. And so it was very important to me to have eye-catching covers. And I like it when people mention that they really like the covers for my books, because I look at them as works of art, really. So, and my kid Ryan is an artist, and so Ryan appreciates that I do that. So that's cool.
So Anthony Mark says, thanks for the conversation on this. I definitely appreciate the diverse cultures in both books. Have heard so far. As a minority, it's always a joy to read about characters that aren't typically written about and not stereotypical. For both writers, do you now feel much more comfortable with writing other characters outside of your culture in your future projects or novels? Do you mind if I start, Scott?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that's really tricky in the book that I read from tonight is I'm trying to explore what Native identity means. And of course it's complex, and I'm certainly not an expert on it, but there's a character who has decided that he is Native, and his daughter is unsure about where he's coming from, but he's also experienced racism. So, that it's tricky stuff. So I hope the book the one that I read from tonight is kind of getting into some of the very issues about what it means to write inside a culture and to write outside that culture. And I've gotten feedback. People have helped me grow my understanding of where I'm making some stereotypes or where I'm treading in tricky water. So to your question, Anthony, do I now feel much more comfortable with writing other characters outside of my culture? I do, but I don't treat it lightly at all. I know that I'm going to need a lot of help to make sure I'm rendering characters with complexity. There's a great article by Daniel Jose Older where he talks about the power of the characters, particularly characters of color traditionally don't have a lot of power. And when written by white writers, or they use their power in service of the white character. So that's been really, really helpful. I'll put the link in the chat box if you want to check it out.
So it's really important to me. This book and my last book, The Squeeze of Prairie Dog, had a diverse cast, and that's the way that I, encounter the world, and that's what I like to see as a human being, is different types of people, and I want those people in my stories, and I want them to be realistic portrayals of those types of folks. And so that was one of the things that was important to me. We talked about it quite a bit, and there were some notes back and forth, because unfortunately, even with that in the front of your mind as a writer, my mind particularly, cliches come out, stereotypical things come out subconsciously. And we had talked about that. There were some things with Brian that came up later that you and I discussed, and you said, you need to rethink this, rethink that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know how it came out that way. I didn't want him to be the way we initially talked about, a facet of his personality. And you were right. It took someone like you to say, well, you need to realize this and kind of look at it. And I did. And it was funny because I don't think I remembered consciously thinking, well, this is how this is going to turn out for this particular guy. You kind of get wrapped up in the process of the writing part. And sometimes things just go. And then sometimes when you go back and you evaluate some of it, it's like you're reliving a dream almost. It's like, oh yeah, this thing came out and, oh, I need to change that. I didn't intend it to be that way. But that's where a great editor comes in, can help see those type of things and help elevate the story and make it better. But this is also, in this particular time, people are more sensitive about it, and I appreciate that, And so I want to make sure that I am sensitive in my stories to those things. And I appreciate your help with that.
Well, and I also think you said I think it's a matter of craft. First drafts are going to have all kinds of cliches, not just around people outside of our experience. And like when we go for really good craft, their characters are going to get more complex. And I just think we write cliches in first drafts.
That's true. Or there's favorite phrases. Yeah, there's favorite words. And sometimes you'll be like, oh, you said this word 50 times in your draft. I'm like, oh, it wasn't even on purpose. I guess mesmerized must be one of my favorite words. And
but you do a really cool thing is that you take and then you turn it. Like they say, I can't remember the exact phrase, and you're like, oh, to be beat senseless. And then you do this thing with it. So you make it fresh. I love when like people get in there and like, well, you think you know what this means, but you don't.
You really don't, right? Or maybe you think it is, but it's actually 10 times worse, which I think is what, William was trying to say, that not only was he beaten senseless, but he saw fireworks, It was just, I love wordplay. I love, we had talked about this in the interview. I love inserting like poetry into my fiction. And what I mean by poetry, I mean just like beautiful words. Some people may even call it purple language, but I like that. I like when the fiction kind of sings and it's not just descriptive. It's not just like you're reading a manual or a history book. I like for it to sing to you. And if I feel passionate enough to write a story, I want the reader to feel that too, because I do care about these characters. And so I hope that when, and that's another thing I want to get on just real quick is that I read a lot of literary fiction a couple years ago, and I stopped because it was so dour and depressing. And I don't know if that's just a sign of the times that you just get so much of it in the news, but I just stopped wanting that in fiction. And this book and the previous one are, they have some sentimental parts, they have some empathetic parts. The story as a whole is kind to the characters. And I think I just really needed that. You mentioned There. That book has a very hard ending. I had a very hard time with the ending of that book. I know it was something that he probably felt he had to say about that particular group of characters, the Native Americans. But I had a real hard time walking away from that book feeling like I felt like I started having some love for some of those characters and what he did to them. I was like, what? Why did he do that? I don't know. But maybe it's just also a sign of the times. Just things are so rough right now for a lot of people that I wanted to have some heart in my stories. So that's very important to me right now.
Sounds like you write toward hope.
Definitely. I think a lot of writers kind of, write to the times. And, in the past when you would read stuff from the Beats or, some of the earlier writers of the 20th century, things were kind of portrayed as being rosy at times, and they were trying to push that away, particularly like in the 50s, right? Like families were portrayed as being these great things. And there were a lot of writers who are like, no, families are ugly and marriages are ugly. And they wanted to show that. And I think I was trying to do the opposite, where we're having a hard time right now. And I want to say, no, there's some good in people. There's some good in people's hearts. It's good to be helpful to each other. And that's kind of the main point of this particular story.
Well, thank you both. I think it looks like we've kind of gotten to the end of all the questions. Certainly appreciate everyone joining us today, and it's just been terrific and wonderful talking to everyone. I think we'll be stopping the YouTube